Another company that I think is, again, known maybe to consumers, but to the average kind of person just paying attention to tech, didn't know 2 years ago, and now is seems to be everywhere, is Canva. And this story is fascinating to me because they're not based in the U.S. Took a very different approach to building that business, but now a multi-billion-dollar company. When did you first meet them, and kind of what was maybe even your first reaction when you came across the approach they were taking, the location they were based in, et cetera?
Yeah, so Melanie Perkins, the head of Canva, is one of the most inspiring or impressive, entrepreneurs I've ever met. But when I first met her, I probably didn't take her as seriously as I should have. I was at the Cloud 100 dinner that we do most years. This year, we're doing a live event for anyone to join because we can't do a dinner. But she had just made the Rising Stars list of companies that have raised under 25 million, but we think are kind of like on a trajectory to make the Cloud 100 in the future. And she came all the way from Australia to San Francisco for the dinner. And I just kind of met her, casually and was like, oh, design software, that sounds interesting. She seemed like to have a lot of charisma, but I didn't have any sense of kind of the community and the numbers that they were pulling. Then I watched as they became a unicorn. They hit a multi-billion valuation, a 2.7 billion valuation when I was, talking to them. And I was like, okay, what is the backstory to this company that is not getting taken seriously enough because it's based in Australia? So I actually flew down to Sydney last June, and I spent a lot of time with her and her partner and co-founder Cliff to kind of just try to like understand what they had nailed so much to build a community of mostly like very small businesses. Because as I'm sure you know well, you can have a ton of small business customers and you may not get the scale of like one of these enterprise companies that only has a few dozen, but they're huge. Canva is both. It has a ton of revenue and a ton of scale, while also like living off of these mom and pop and small type businesses. So we went there. Fascinating time for me, and I did have a few kind of learnings from that I'm happy to share. But I would say overall, the number one lesson was you can build a business like that anywhere with the right ingredients. And so I think being in Australia, they just crept up on a lot of people.
Yeah. What were some of the other lessons?
Yeah, I would say, Canva spent a lot of time really like making sure that its customers were ambassadors of the product. So they wanted to make sure that anyone could get up and running in less than 10 minutes. And they would actually track how long it would take someone to actually make a design on Canva. And I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind is like, how quickly can someone actually take the plunge to use your tool? So they did a lot of work there. And then they also did a lot of work basically paying it forward with their business, where they gave away a ton of their features for free. And they really didn't stress about revenue early on. Obviously, they had to stay very lean to do that. And I think being in Australia, their costs were lower. But they basically nailed this kind of freemium model in a better than usual way, so that then when they turned on their enterprise products, businesses started to convert. And then I would say they also nailed the visual trend, right? Like Instagram and the power of strong visuals and video as part of our brand today, whether it's a person or a company. Like that was something that I think 5-6 years ago still wasn't quite as obvious to businesses, especially. And so they enabled people to basically start bikini companies by just having like great designs to show off their products. I actually met an Australian bikini company through the process, but they basically saw that in the Instagram world, brands that did not stick out in more than just kind of their text or their products would not get noticed. And they were like, how can we build tools for those folks? And so I think like they would tell you that social media was not the original end all be all for them, and especially not Instagram, but they just really quickly leaned into that. I don't know how TikTok plays into that in the future, but I'm sure they're thinking about it.
Yeah, it just seems like that's a company where it's very obvious the founders understood, hey, if we can solve problems for the consumer, they'll eventually become our customer, right? And it just seemed like, reading through that, you're like every step of the way they kept that focus. I recently wrote a piece basically talking about this idea of most of the tech companies seem to have been customer or consumer focused for a while now, and that's playing out now and being a huge tailwind during COVID. A lot of the legacy kind of non-tech companies, so whether it's airlines, fast food chains, et cetera, I think they always talked about it, but now they're realizing like, oh, maybe, airlines shouldn't charge $200 to let you change your flight, right? Maybe actually we should just let you do that because that's something that reduces friction and will lead to you increasing the number of flights you book rather than decreasing it. And so it just feels like Canva is like the perfect embodiment of that, where they just, paid attention to what their customers wanted and have been able to grow obviously incredibly fast.
I think that's a great point. I think if you're a business where talking to your customers is fun, that's a huge advantage, right? If it's not fun, that changes the game completely. If it's like, how do we minimize our engagement with you so that you don't cancel? A company like Canva, I think they just really enjoyed like being out in the community and talking to their customers. And I think especially someone like Melanie, when her users felt like they knew her or that she was one of them, it created a brand loyalty that is powerful. Because Adobe does, it does have a good leader in its kind of competitive unit in Scott Belsky, and it has good products. And design software will not be the most defensible tool from a moat standpoint forever. But Canva's brand is extremely strong because I think they actually just love working with people. And so if you wrote them, and this is actually the same as Eric Yuan at Zoom, if you wrote these entrepreneurs and were like, here are all my problems with your product, they're the kind of founder who wouldn't get upset. They'd be like, thank you so much. I will take all this to heart. I'm so grateful that you would reach out. And that's definitely a mindset thing.